Welcome, everyone, to the Real News Network. My name is Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief here at The Real News, and it's so great to have you all with us. The Real News is an independent, viewer-supported, nonprofit media network, which means we don't do ads, we don't take corporate cash, and we don't put our content behind paywalls. So we need each one of you to become a supporter of our work so we can keep bringing you coverage of the issues and voices you care about most. So please head on over to therealnews.com/support and become a monthly sustainer of our work. It really makes a difference. From Starbucks, Chipotle, and Amazon to museums, strip clubs, nonprofits, and private universities, the wave of grassroots worker organizing is spreading to different industries and businesses around the country and beyond, including those that have notoriously resisted any and all unionization efforts in the past. The Home Depot, the single largest home improvement retail company in the United States, is one of those businesses. In the fall of last year, workers at a Home Depot store in Northeast Philadelphia announced their campaign to unionize and filed for a union election with the National Labor Relations Board. Vince Quiles, a local boy who has worked at the Northeast Philly store for 5 years and was being groomed by the company to move up through the supervisor ranks, is the worker organizer who led the union drive and filed the petition with the NLRB. Vince and his co-workers faced a steep uphill battle in their attempt to become the first Home Depot store in the United States to unionize. Home Depot is a notoriously anti-union company and the fifth largest private employer in the country. And like the Amazon Labor Union in New York, workers in Philadelphia were pushing to form an independent union under the banner of Home Depot Workers United. That initial unionization effort came up short. When the votes were tallied in early November, 165 employees at the Philly store voted against joining the union, and 51 voted in favor of unionizing. But the struggle is still very much ongoing, and the organizing effort Vince and his co-workers led has made waves in stores and corporate offices around the country. Because the labor movement is just that, a movement. It is not a single moment in time, not a single strike or union effort. Every day is a chance to grow the movement, to learn from mistakes and defeats, to build rank and file power, and for working people to keep fighting together to improve their workplaces and their lives. For The Real News, I got to travel to Philadelphia in January of this year and meet Vince in person to reflect on the union drive at his Home Depot store, to talk about the lessons we can learn from this struggle, and to look ahead at what comes next. For Vince, for Home Depot workers everywhere, and for the labor movement.
My name is Vince Quiles. I am a Home Depot receiving associate. I've been working there for about 6 years now, and I recently tried to organize a union there. I guess a little bit of the backstory, kind of like to quantify where I have the beliefs that I do and why I feel strongly as I do. So I was on the trajectory for the corporate side there. When I first started, I was in college. It's kind of just working that as a side hustle. I wanted to get, I think at the time I was studying engineering, and I switched to economics. But my brain was kind of more on that stuff. But as time went on, I had a kid. There was a little bit of a wrench in the plans, and so, trying to be a good father, and a good provider, you say, okay, well, there's some headway that I can make in a company like this. The store manager had been asking me a lot to, go for a supervisor position and consider it. So I said, you know what, in the meantime, we'll try and make this happen. Times are tough out there, right? Money ain't getting you as far as it used to. So, and just a lot of the things that I've learned, within my journey as an associate, to learning how the sausage was made, and seeing how things happen behind the scenes, and realizing just the mentality that goes into place, and how everything started to make sense in terms of how people are treated, how people are struggling. Like you kind of peek behind that curtain, you understand it more, and so hey, we're like, you know what? Let's try and organize, right? Because I think of it like this, like trying to get somebody to step out in front and to do something is extremely difficult, understandably so, because there's so much for people to lose. Right? And you never want to diminish that. And so what I kind of recognize and what like I personally took the step to move forward was to say like, look, like I've got a great support system. You know, since my son was born, my parents have always like taken care of him, you know, in terms of like buying him diapers and stuff like that. My father-in-law helps out a lot with like sometimes like if we're short on bills and stuff like that. So it's like you get this support system that a lot of other people don't have, and so then you kind of recognize like, oh, like you have this opportunity to move forward and to help people. And so you kind of take that energy and that frustration of like the things that you go through at work, you know, the unhappiness of your coworkers around you, recognizing how awesome they are and how much they deserve a better environment, an environment that's more conducive to the lives they want to live, and then recognizing how inherently working within a place like Home Depot in the way that we are, where we're so disconnected, is just is going to breed the type of stuff that we're going through. And so the only real solution is to try and get everybody on the same page, right? One person you're powerless, but together you can do a lot.
Beautifully put, my man. And I remember when you and I first talked on my podcast, Working People, and I feel like we could have talked for like 8 hours.
Yeah, for sure.
But like you mentioned that moment, right, where you really did feel like having, like kind of gone the route of like being able to advance through management, going like kind of possibly the corporate side, but at the same time seeing yourself and then seeing in what your coworkers were going through, right, that this was an untenable situation, something had to be done. And I think you described to me that you were kind of on the fence between quitting or something else.
Yeah.
Like you already started talking about this because I feel like that's a position that almost all of us can relate to.
Yeah.
And I feel like every time I've been in that position, it was in a context where the thought of banding together with my coworkers, knowing my rights, right? Even mentioning the word unionization, it just wasn't even on my radar. It was like, well, this job sucks, so what I've been told my whole life is if you don't like it, quit, right? So like, I was wondering if you could just take us back to that moment and like what, you already started talking about this, but what was it that made you decide, I'm not going to leave, I'm going to stay and fight for myself and for my coworkers?
Yeah, I mean, dude, I think you hit that spot on. And like, you know, something, I don't know that I talked about this a whole lot, but like even before I organized, right, like I applied to the fire department. I actually signed up for a real estate course, like literally like a month or two before I started organizing, right? So like, that's to your point, like my mind was, I was like, look, like you can't win here, so you have to move on. And I feel like it was just like, it was like two like major things, right? It was hearing something Chris Small said, where he was like, you know, if you don't like what's going on at your job, don't quit, organize. And I mean, I have to give it with the caveat of like, look, like I did not want to stay at Home Depot. Just the way that my brain works, like staying there for a long time was never gonna work, right? But where that really like hit me again is if you can do something about it, like why not? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, you know, you'll put all of these barriers on yourself to not do something. Oh, well, I'm leaving anyway, right? I had some people close to me who said that like when I was taking this on, like, oh, can't you just pass this off to somebody else? And it's like, no, like if you're the one to kind of like see it and see that it has to happen, then you have to follow through with it, you know? And then the second part of it was, you know, one of my coworkers just kind of challenging me. You know, we're talking about like company numbers and stuff like that. I'm like, yo, dude, can you believe, you know, Arthur Blank cleared $28.5 million in 3 months off of his quarterly dividends from his shares? You know, I'm kind of just like running through all that, and he's like, all right, well, like, what are you gonna do about it? And that kind of made me take a step back and think, because, right, like, to be honest, to just bring up problems, to complain about stuff all the time, like that's actually kind of cruel to not bring forward a solution. And so, like, dude, like, look, like, I listen to you, I listen to Crystal and Sagar, like, you're hearing about this labor movement, you're hearing about what's going on at Starbucks, about what's going on at Amazon, you know, the John Deere strike, just all of this stuff happening across the country, and it's like the solution is like literally slapping you in the face, like, dude, this is what you have to do. And it's like, Yeah, you know what, you're right. And I mean, like, I could say, like, and maybe people can, like, connect with this, like, where I was also at just personally, like, at that point in my life. Like, I always, like, kind of, like, use, like, when Crystal and Sagar, like, started breaking points, it's kind of like the benchmark, because that was around the time that I stepped down. And I remember hearing them talk so much about going independent, and it's why I think that was also so influential, is because it was like, yo, like, being a principled person in this day and age is actually, like, really fucking difficult. Like, it's like, yo, it's hard, like, to like sit there and to, like, actually have principles that you, like, can espouse and say, like, yo, like, I live according to these like, especially if you feel that they're rooted in, like, compassion and love for one another. It's fucking hard, you know. But it's like, you kind of also, like, sit and reflect, and I was just like, bro, like, when I'm an old man and, like, I'm about to die and I look in the mirror, I'm like, who do I want to see?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, oh, like, I don't want to go that corporate route. I don't want to lie to people. And so to kind of bring it back to talking with my coworker, it was like, oh, like, this is going to be hard, but this is the moment to, like, live your truth, right? And for so long, like, I was just so frustrated in my early 20s and missed opportunities, and I was just like, yo, like, I just want a chance to see an opportunity before it happens, like, see an opportunity to do something that I would feel good about, that I feel is conducive to, like, my nature and my identity as a person. And it was like, yeah, like, when that happened, you see all this stuff going on with organizing, you're like, yo, like, that's it right there. Like, that's what you do. And you can sit here, you can have your perceptions of yourself and stuff like that, right? But if you're not really, like, doing shit, it's never gonna happen. And so I saw that, I was like, you know what? Yeah, like, we're gonna go for this, because even though I don't plan on staying here, like, if you want to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, like, that's what that is. Like, it can't matter anymore about, oh, like, are you going to stay here, just quit that, because I feel like that's part of what has led us to this point, is the fact that so many people just, you know, up and left and said, you know what, we're not going to deal with this one. Somebody's going to have to deal with it at some point down the road.
Right.
You know?
I mean, that's like such a key point, too. And it's one that I hear from workers and organizers like yourself from all over the place, right? I remember recently talking to Harry Marino, who was a former minor league baseball player. And he talked about the long path that led to the minor leaguers finally unionizing, and now they're affiliated with the MLBPA, which was like no one thought would ever really happen, right? For a number of reasons. But one that Harry talked about that mirrors almost exactly what you just said is because everyone in that position playing minor league baseball, I mean, you do it because you hope that you can get to that next level. And you're already in such a precarious situation. I mean, at the time Harry was playing, guys were making like $3,000 a year. You're living in like a house with like 10 other guys. You're eating KFC every single day. You're not, you know, you're taking care of yourself as best you can. But it's a very precarious life that you endure because of the promise of making it. And a lot of guys don't. But what keeps so many people who recognize the problem from doing something about it is feeling like, well, if I take that step, I'm basically burning my chance of making it. But what Harry said, and the other guys who took that step with him, was like, if we don't do it, it'll literally be the same situation in like 50 years, 100 years. Like nothing's gonna change unless people take that step like you did, which is a really brave and incredible thing to do. And what I think is so inspiring is that the more folks like you who take that step, the more people at other Home Depots, other coffee shops, other warehouses say, why not us, right? I mean, it does, people will talk about the fact that you guys didn't win the union election as like this like definitive, well, that's it, they don't want a union, end of story. No. The struggle very much continues. And I've talked to people who said, we saw what Vince and the folks in Philly were doing. We see ourselves as part of this movement. We're not going to win them all, but if they're fighting, like, why don't we? Right? They can't stop all of us, is what one worker told me. I thought that was really beautifully put.
I think what's so like important to consider too, right? And it's hard, like, sometimes being like in this position to like figure out like what are the best things to say for people to kind of like understand. So I guess like if you look at how like our drive went, like Max. When I tell you, we lost 165 to 51, like, for sure, we did. but it was such a win. Like, ask me how much money we spent.
How much money did you guys spend?
$0. You know, ask me how many people were like, actually, like how many other people did interviews, like how many people were actually out front. It was really like one person pushing through, and then with, you know, some support from some of his coworkers, but like everybody's like on the fence, like, oh, you know, yeah, people didn't want the union, but it was because honestly, like we just pulled like a freaking Star Wars Rebels type move and said, you know what, we're gonna get these signatures, you know, and again, like a lot of it was just not right. These movements are so important in terms of like working with others, but to be like, if I'm being 100% honest, I did like 95% of the work myself. You know, I was carrying a lot of that weight, and so what I would want people to kind of see in that, and what I try and preach to other people now when I'm talking to people, like you said, people at other Home Depots want to do the same thing. And what we talk about now is the importance of that organizing committee, because I think the point to actually be made in that is, look at what one dude with just like the sheer will to say, you guys are fucking wrong, and somebody needs to fight for these other people here. Like, look at where that can take you. Like, we watch 2 videos a year talking about not unionizing, talking about protecting your signature, right? They've got associate relations, which is the union busting wing of the company. Like, they spend all of this money. Dude, I was talking with our regional vice president the other day, right? And you could see like, and those mannerisms, right? So he's talking, he's a confident guy. There's only 4 of them in the company, right? So you got to have some skill, you know, and I give that credit where it's due. But like, I noticed in talking to him, like his hands, like this, you know, and it's in moments like that that you realize actually the power that you hold, right? Because it's like, why are you nervous like that? Where is that fear coming from? Because it's the second someone is willing to kind of stand out and buck that system, and that's what, like being a union organizer is, that's what going for that type of stuff is. Like, it puts you in a powerful position, and what I see it as is where we may have lost, like everything that we learned out of that was not that you should give up, but actually that you should continue, right? They just gave a bunch of people in our store between $1.50 and $2 raise. Ask me how much the raises were the 2 years prior, the 3 years prior.
How much were they
They
prior?
were capped out, it was between 50 cents and $1. You know what they said? They said, we're giving your store a little bit more, even though we're finding some discrepancies in that because some other places are also getting the same thing, although what we're thinking is maybe they're starting to consider the volume and the workload. But again, all of those decisions that they're making, you know where they got that from? They got that from talking to people in our store. They got that from going and watching that, you know, rabble rousers TikToks, right? I even got these people to admit that they're on my Twitter, they're on my TikTok, like they're watching all that stuff, right? Because that's the thing is, it's because again, it's you don't have to have a degree, you don't have to like if you just understand your peers and you understand the problems that you go through and you can connect with people, like that's what scares them. I tell people that all the time. They're like, oh, look at what you did, you got it. I was like, no, it's not the one person who was willing to put his name on the petition and file it. Yeah. It was the 105 other names that were with it. That was the shit that actually scared them, right? That was what actually made them afraid. And so again, it's like, I look at it and I think it's funny when some, like, you know, you get some of that like hate mail, like, oh, you fucking lost, you lazy lefty, you know? And I just like, I personally laugh at it because I'm like inherently within that, like you're missing the whole point. Like the real goal, like after going through this stuff, and like what I realize is the power is the connection. Yeah. Right? The connection and doing something with the connection that you have between yourself and your coworkers, right? So you see these people every day. You know, you're talking, you know about their lives, you know their families, you know what's going on, and like you connect with your coworkers and your peers in a way that the higher ups never could. Yeah. And it's not even getting into the right or wrong of it. It's just like, how can you? Yeah. You know, if I show up to work with you every day and this guy works in a fucking office 6 states away, like, it's not gonna know shit about you. Yeah. You know, and so then the standard that you should apply as a worker is to say, well, my colleagues and I, my coworkers and I, we should be able to have these discussions in our work environment and then go back to that guy who's the money man and be like, look, this is what's going to work for us. Now you go run those numbers and figure out how to make that shit work on that end. Right. You know, and that's kind of like, that was the overarching goal that we wanted to get across to people, but that ultimately like we couldn't. Yeah. You know, and I think that's also another important thing, and I personally don't shy away from that. Like, yeah, like, you know what, like we lost, but again, the way I saw that whole situation unfold was like, we lost. Like, they didn't win. It's kind of just one of those, like, right, like, look at the game this past weekend. Like, firstly, love my birds. Like, we smashed them.
First things first, go birds.
But, you know, look, your starting quarterback goes down, your guy that has you 7-0, like, that puts you in a difficult position, and you can kind of see the writing on the wall. And that's where just I feel that we were at was the ammunition we had, right? The roster we had was really good. The things that we had to say, it was just kind of following it through. Like, we dropped the ball, we missed the mark, and so Home Depot was kind of able to skate away with that. Like,
well, and I mean, they're playing like with the deck very much stacked in their favor already. I mean, like, I hope that anyone who watches The Real News or Breaking Points or listens to Working People will at least understand at this point, like, we're playing on a very skewed chessboard right now. Labor law stacked in favor of the bosses. When I talk to people outside of the U.S. about the process to unionizing a non-union shop in the U.S., they're like, how does anyone get a union? Like, with all of those steps and barriers and like ways that companies can stall and derail and try to decertify. I mean, look at what Amazon's doing right now. The Amazon labor union, you mentioned Chris Smalls, no one gave them a shot either. Like you, it felt like a very Star Wars like rebel insurgency. It was an independent union movement, and I think they had some support, more moral support, but not a lot of institutional support like you guys did. And so, you know, that they won fair and square in a warehouse of like over 8,000 people.
It's still fucking crazy to think about.
Still wild to think about, and yet Amazon is just trying to file, you know, motion after motion to throw the election results out. Like, just flipping over the chessboard, saying like, you know, we lost, so like we refuse to accept the results. The NLRB finally certified the election results, and Amazon says it's going to appeal again. So like, they're going to run out of appeals eventually. But because they have so much money, so much influence, because labor law is so stacked in favor of the bosses, like, this is why we have to be in it for the long haul. Because even if you win, then you're going to face all that other bullshit. And so, you know, that's also why it's so important for folks to hear and listen to what you're saying, because, yeah, it's very much we may have lost the battle, but this is an ongoing war.
For sure.
Right? And there's a lot of lessons that I think people can build on from what y'all did, trying to become the first union at a very notoriously anti-union company, the largest like home improvement retailer in the world. No easy feat, right? And so, like you said, the fact that you got even as close as you did, that you got the signatures that you did, that you got the attention that you did, and that you got this response from the company just from this like one insurgent campaign. Like, now imagine if people starting at another store can, like, you know, take those lessons and be even more organized, more mobilized, have more of those organizing, have a stronger, bigger organizing committee. Then like we can maybe break through. So I want to kind of focus in on that for a second. Like, let's reflect a bit. You already started doing this, but like, I guess like thinking like in practical terms, if there are folks watching this who are at other Home Depots or Lowe's or other stores, I don't know, you know, doesn't even have to be in home improvement. Like, what would you want them to know about what the organizing looked like for you at your store? What lessons you kind of can reflect on now that you think would benefit other people who are starting from the beginning?
One of the first things that I would say is like, look, like if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you're already on the track to organizing, right? And if you're somebody that has strong connections, strong relationships with people, if people seek you out when things are going on in the store and they want to, you know, kind of go back and forth about what's happening, right? That's important. And what you do is through that, right? Like, you kind of identify people. And that was something I tried to do, was, you know, pick out like 4 or 5 people who are like, yo, like, you know, you guys are very well liked, you know, you understand the problems. Again, the major thing was just the fear that people had of like retaliation. And here's where I'm going to encourage other Home Depot associates to kind of consider this, right? Home Depot's in a unique space. They do not like bad publicity. Like, the thing they're the most upset about in all of this is the bad publicity that came from this, which is why now they're starting to like change things. They're up in the raises a little bit. They're like going to build like a convenience store it's like this like weird like convenience store type thing in our store. that it's like just for it's like a 7-Eleven for like Home Depot employees. It's kind of weird. I don't know. They think it's like really cool. Personally, I don't really care about that. I'm like,
Well,
I want to go to 7-Eleven. I go to 7-Eleven.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, that sounds nice, but we also have a history of something called company stores in the U.S. That's like, they may want to Google that before they go through with that plan.
Well, and they're they're talking about like, right, it's funny like hearing like how they kind of like addressed it. It's just like myself in that particular instance, right? Because I'm like into fitness and all this, like, yeah, well, they can also have like healthy snacks. Because in my mind, I'm also over here like, what type of options are you guys gonna like offer people? Like,
you got hot fries or what?
Exactly. Like, so, but I mean, to that end, right? Like in the end, like it's still wholly inadequate in terms of what it is that you're talking about. But ultimately, it's still something more than what they were originally doing, right? Building employee bathrooms and things like that. And again, it's like they're doing that because people took the time to stand up. And again, it's whether it was one guy talking shit or the other 105 that were sitting there like sign the paper, or the other 4 or 5 again that like maybe didn't go on camera, maybe didn't get in front of faces at rallies, but they still did like put in work and like talk to people and would say, hey, like I know you're hearing what Home Depot's saying in this sense, but maybe this is the other stuff you should consider. The big thing though is it's like getting out there and then realizing, because Home Depot does not like that bad publicity, as long as you are well versed and understand like what your rights as a worker are, and you have that willingness to go toe to toe with them, you're like, they won't do shit. Like that's so funny, right? I was talking to someone who's privy to certain conversations, and one of the things that like they were talking about like in my particular store, so like our receiving in my department used to be a mess, like all the time, so bad. And not that I like really cared about it. Like you look at the criticisms, it was always about like the culture of the company, but like somebody was just like, yo, dude, like your department is so fucking clean all the time now because they're so scared that you're gonna like say something or like do something, right? And of course, that's not their posture. Like when we go back and forth, right? They kind of try and have that position of power, and we take the lead here. But it's like when you break it down like that, and you understand your principle, and you have that backing from your peers, they can't touch you. And so a lot of the reasons why you would be scared, maybe in other places like Starbucks, where you got a wacko like Howard Schultz, breaking the law left and right, and what they're doing at Amazon, what they did at Chipotle, and with the store that Brandy tried to organize, right? Like they might do that stuff, but in the end, like you really push. Like Home Depot's not like they're trying really hard to avoid that brand and that label. Because the other thing too, like look, I'm gonna say it like this: when you look at and I would encourage other Home Depot workers to like consider what I'm saying, right? Because what I'm personally seeing in my stores, you've got a large, like a semi-large group of veterans now who like know how to do everything in the store, but they're all getting ready to phase out. And then you've got all these younger kids who are coming in who are like, they're like, no, like I don't want to learn like this shit. Like if you're not gonna pay me, like if you're not gonna give me a reason to do this stuff, I'm not gonna do it. And so now I think they're running into a point where like, look, not being able to make money is not the only way to lose your business. If you can't get people to come in, like that's also going to be an issue. And it's like, again, like that's also where you kind of have to feed off of that.
Yeah.
If you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, even if you're in your mid-20s, like, like you have so much power that you just don't know. Yeah. And it's because you don't talk with each other. And like, that's the big thing is it's like, like, just talk with each other. Build that energy within the store, kind of get everybody activated and ready to work, and then recognize like it's also easier when you have like a vision of what it could be. Yeah. And like for me personally, like just between looking at like the labor movement, I also like to listen to a lot of like economists like Richard Wolff and stuff like as who are more like Marxist economists, and kind of squaring that with where we are now. And it's where like I think like look, if you envision it like ownership and the means of production, and workers have an ownership stake in their companies. You get a large enough one, they can't make decisions without you. Yeah. Then you can start to actively make decisions in your workplace that allow you to do the things you want to do. And now what you can say is, oh, productivity has shot up like how much since the 70s? Yeah. Like what, like 60, 70%?
It's been pretty much like a straight line up.
Yeah, meanwhile wages are going, and they're stagnating. And I think what the key now for people to consider is, and you have to lay this groundwork now, is to make these jobs so that they can be side jobs that earn you money, right? And rather than Arthur Blank or rather than Ted Decker making like $7 million a year and like $5 million of that being from the stock inflation that they do with their stock buybacks, like Maybe that can be you working, you know, a 30-hour work week, you know, and being able to pay all your bills off of that. But guess what? Now you got an extra 10, 12 hours to go and like maybe
That sounds great.
Something like what you did, where like you go, you pursue, you know, some type of independent project, something where you can, you know, have a little bit more going on. Like I say, for me, like I love music, I love fitness, and there are ways in which you can make money in that. But the problem is you spending 40 hours at work.
Yeah.
You know, I remember you did this great piece on like monopolizing time at the workplace and how that can hold you back. And it's like, look, like to your point, like there's a way that we can do something about that. It's like, this is how we do it. And the major thing you have to do is to just not be afraid. You know, fight. Remember the struggles that, you know, the person next to you goes through. Remember that a rising tide raises all ships. You know, an example I would always tell people is like, say you live in a neighborhood, it's 100 people, right? And it's just those 100 people. I know that that would never work in the real world because you gotta, but let's just say for the sake of the argument, you got 100 people right in this community. And like 2 people are like really, really struggling, like they can't pay their bill. Guess what? Y'all all gonna feel that because they're gonna go, they're gonna rob, they're gonna steal. And you know, people can sit here and they can say what's right or wrong, but something I would always consider, especially growing up, you know, not too far from North Philly, is like, look, I got a 2-year-old. And you want to see the dark things that I could do? Put me in a position where I can't feed him, and you'll see what I can do. You know what I mean? And that's the thing, is you can sit here and you can act like, oh, well, that's not me. Like, that's not going to, you know, no. Like, we live in a society, like, humans are meant to be communal. They're meant to interact with each other within a society. And whether you think acting in a certain way is right or wrong, like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And you push people to that point. Why do you think crime has been going so much in the city?
Right, and when you have a society that is so unkind and unfeeling to those basic human needs, that people in that situation whose wages have been stagnant for decades while the cost of living is through the roof. We don't live in a country anymore where there's even like a kind of widely shared belief that we should have a robust social safety net to make sure that anyone in that situation or worse still has a house, a roof over their head, you know, water to drink, health care when they need it. Like, no, like what do people honestly think? And I wish I could talk to my former conservative self. You know, we talked about this before, I grew up very conservative, Latino family, and like sometimes I just wish I could sit in chairs like this and talk to them. It's like, what do you think is going to happen, you know, when you have a society going in both of these directions simultaneously, like eroding that sort of floor, that kind of universal minimum standard below which we will not let anyone in our society fall. We will not let people live on the street when we have housing available. We won't let people die of treatable diseases when we have all this health care available but not accessible to anyone, right? Where do you think this is all gonna go when you have that at the same time that people are working longer, harder, and yet seeing less take-home pay while cost of living goes up and all of the wealth is going to fucking Wall Street, right? Or to the bosses and CEOs? Like, something is going to give. And I think you made a really, really crucial point where we can articulate that vision of what a better version of this looks like, a better world looks like. Because you're right, I think as an organizer, anyone doing that organizing has to be able to articulate what the better version looks like. Because otherwise it's like, imagine going to a doctor every day of the week and he just tells you, yeah man, your kidney's fucked, your elbow's fucked, see you tomorrow. Like, but he's not giving you like,
yeah, what are my solutions at there? Like, can I do something about this?
Can I do something about this? But just keep telling you what's wrong. That's not gonna motivate people for the long haul, I think. But like right now we are in a key position along with everything that you said, but we could say like, look, all this labor is going into all these different industries. And it's not us who aren't holding up our end of the bargain. It's not us who are making the quality of service go down. You said something to me that really stuck with me when we first talked back for the podcast. Because you said you came to a realization when you were going around the store talking to everyone and everyone was pissed off about something. And you realized that the person who's responsible, or the people who are responsible for the things we're pissed off at, are not in the store. And then in the store, it feels like it's always like, oh, it's that guy who didn't do this thing, or this person who didn't show up for work. But realistically, it's this business model where everyone's working their asses off, but being asked to do more with less. and just keep their heads down while all of this money's being siphoned out of these stores. That's a really like pivotal realization where you could say like if workers had more control, those resources were going back into the workforce, the stores, the ways that we treat customers. Like this could actually be a much better business than it is now, just siphoning off as much excess profit as we can into the pockets of shareholders and executives.
And I see, like, I don't know, like me personally, like when I would look at like organizing and again, where I encourage people to get in this is to say like, look, like what makes a lot of workplaces like go, and I say this working at, you know, Home Depot, working at like UPS, working a lot of like physical like labor jobs, like, you know, working in a warehouse. Tell me if you disagree with this, but I think what really helps those places go is actually the standard that the employees set for themselves, right? What always made me work harder wasn't a manager coming by and being like, work harder. It was like my homie next to me being like, damn, bro, like you're a little slow today. What you feeling a little weak or something?
Oh, like, we talked all kinds of shit, and it was like, it was very much that kind of like rivalry that motivated us to work harder and better, not the VP who would come in and bark at us every day.
Exactly. And it's like, man, and then you're looking at it like Mr. Soft Hands, like what the fuck are you talking about, dude? Like get out my face with that shit. Like think about like the other day, right? Like it was a month or two ago. I felt so bad for our guys on the breakdown crew. Like they're unloading the trucks. It's like 40, 50 people just standing there like watching them. And you're right, like trying to like learn and shit like that. And you're like, even in that environment, like you can't really learn like what the shit's actually hitting for, because like everybody has to be like super time. Like when we used to have those types of things, when I was there, I was like, yeah, no, that shit. They'd be like, well, you can't wear headphones, you gotta wear your apron. I'm like, do you want me to get this done?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And again, it's like, because ultimately it's the people that work there that set that standard. Like when I first started and I worked on the breakdown crew, right? And maybe this can kind of give like a little bit of like highlight to like what pushes a person to this point. So like, I used to come in, I would throw the truck, right? Say like, for instance, you have in the summertime, it's like July. Like, imagine 90 degrees outside. So what do you think a big giant metal can is like? You know, it's aluminum siding.
So the warehouse I worked at for the longest period of time was in the city of industry in Southern California. No AC, and like we would go into the you know, like the cabs, like when, not the cabs, but like the 18-wheelers when they would pull up. It was like walking into an oven. And like I would be running back out into the 100-degree warehouse to cool down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you feel like it's so hot in the truck that you feel like when you walk, like when we would walk out of the truck and in the receiving end, it would still be like 95 degrees in there, but it's like this like blast of like cooler air where you're like, oh, thank God, you know, and right, it's like, you go through that, and like I think about like the times and that was really difficult, and you know what helped that to go and what helped people to push forward was, again, like the camaraderie that we had between each other, right? Was all of us sitting there like, oh, I bet you I could throw the truck faster than you, or I could clear my side of the belt faster than you can, right? And I mean, you ultimately do that because you're like, look, like I gotta be here, so like we've got to like try and spice this up and have some fun, like somehow. But then it's like, right, like then like all the things that are like fun, that are cool for you to do, like you gotta like tuck away like once corporate comes around, and it's like, wait, like why do we have to play pretend for people that couldn't do what we do? Because I'm gonna say that shit straight up, and that's how I looked at those people. Like, you want to sit here, you want to talk, so right, you got some smug looks like when people come through visiting from corporate, and you feel like a freaking zoo animal in the receiving end. Like, you're like, oh, is this the guy that tried to start the union? But it's like, yo, like, literally, like when the employees in that building are like fully functioning, right? Like there's a reason why down in Atlanta our store is known the way that it is. And I say it like that. Like we know managers that have gone down there, right? And they won't say like that they work at our store, and everybody's like, oh God, could you imagine working at 4112, this, that, the third? Only for them to finally come up and be like, oh yeah, why work? Exactly. So it's like you have that type of reputation. What do you think makes that go then? Clearly not Home Depot, because everybody that's like the home, like the part that runs it, like they're freaking scared of that place. You know what I mean? Like we had one lady who was visiting to help. She was there for like 3 days, and she's calling her freaking what they call the ASDS, the Associate Support Department Supervisor, calling like, oh my God, I want to go back to our store. Like this place is crazy. The people are rude. Nothing's in the right spot. Everything's a mess. And it's like, imagine you're supposed to be here to help with that shit. And that's our life every single day, every day. So then if that's the case, how is it going? How is it running? It's running because of the people. So then if that's the case, define your standard for yourself and cut out all the middlemen. Cut out like all the people in between. Like I think about that all the time. Like, look, I try really hard to give like the store manager that we have now like the benefit of the doubt. You ever look at anything I said before? Like I never came at the management staff. I never came in. But it's like now is where I take the gloves off. Like you deal with noodles like that. They just do what they're told, right? Like that's like if you don't want to deal with people like they're ultimately a barrier to what you want. Right? Because they're going to have to go and they're going to have to talk to their boss who's going to have to talk to their boss who's going to have. I'm looking over at Starbucks like, look, they're going through some shit, but you know what? I'd rather be in their position sitting down at the table like, yeah, we're bypassing all of that bullshit now and we're dealing with the people that can actually make something happen than to like hope and pray that you get somebody who's competent enough and not such a Home Depot cheerleader that they would actually do what's right by you.
Yeah.
Like I think about that like with our store manager. I'm like, dude, like how do you walk around with Home Depot's hand so far up your ass, bro? Like, and that's like, that's what you want to represent you. And you're clearly like, there's always going to come a point where your interest as a worker and the interest of the company are going to be diametrically opposed.
Yep.
And I'm telling you right now, that guy has made his bones not looking out for people. He did it by doing exactly what Home Depot told him to do, when they told him to do it, how they told him to do it, how far they told him to run, how high they told him. Like that's not a leader.
Yeah.
Like that's not a leader. That's not somebody that can push you to where you want to go. That's somebody that's going to go and he lives a real nice life, I bet.
Yeah.
You know, but again.
No, it's like what they need. It's like, I mean, and that's what I noticed at different warehouses and factories and stuff, was I was like, oh, the managers aren't smarter than us. They are just the perfect personality type to be a manager.
Yeah.
Which is like, because you're essentially the enforcer of the shitty, unpopular, inefficient, like policies that corporate's handing down. You need yes men, you know, to be the ones to implement that and have just like, yeah, that side of them that is so loyal to the company that when workers are saying like this doesn't work, this is a dumb policy, or like it's running people into the ground, you need to be a certain type of person to be able to fold your arms and say like tough, then like it's you guys are doing something wrong.
And that's so like difficult, right? Because to that end, right? And like where I always try and like stray that line is because with the previous managers we had, like especially like the assistant managers, like I felt for them. Like they're people from like North Philly, you know, like from impoverished areas that like never thought that they could have the life that they have.
Yeah.
And that's like really, really freaking hard. And it was why like I always reserve judgment for those types of people, because it's like, look, like we do all have a job to do at the end of the day. But to that point, like there are certain people, like the store manager we have now, where it's like, no, dude, like you've been here for 30 years, like you could have actually set yourself up in a way to have that sway to really do right by the people. But instead, like, yo, I'm talking with the dude, right? So we're getting our raises, and you know, I'm talking with him, and I'm telling him at the end, right? Because I try and still be diplomatic, and I'm like, look, I know, like, I'm hard to do. Clearly, I'm hard to deal with. I know he's gonna see this shit and be like, oh, look at this guy talking shit. Like, I know I'm very hard to deal with, and I can empathize with the difficult situation that someone's in, even if I don't agree with the position that they take.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, and I'm again just trying to kind of like be like, you know what, I'm gonna take it a little bit easy. I know I always go for it. And what does this guy do but immediately make me regret it? And yeah, you know, stuff like that is tough, but it's times like this where you can affect positive change that really make it worth it. And it's like, my boy, you think you did this?
Yeah.
Like you think you did this?
Wait, so he's taking credit for the raises now?
Yeah, it's like you
my
did.
God.
And it's the thing is, it's like you can't even sit and understand like why we were so upset and how important taking those actions are to the people in terms of reinforcing their confidence in you as a leader. Like you can't even understand that, right? Because again, he just kept trying to basically say, oh, well, more money, more money.
Yeah.
And I could tell what he was basically trying to do is be like, give them more money, then everything will be fine. And it's like, no, like these are surface level issues, right? These are just kind of like the top of the issue, right? Because you get a $2 raise, you're maybe happy for a little bit, and then guess what? You know, the inflation numbers kick in, still turns out that they're still fucking going up.
Yep.
You're still struggling to pay your bills, and then guess what? The $2 is just like, that was cool like a couple months ago,
Yeah,
but
now it's a pay cut.
Now it's like completely undone. Yeah, I was talking to one buddy of mine, it's like he got his raise, and it ended up being like, what was it? I think his raise was like a 4% increase in his pay, but like inflation was at like 6.5% or something like that. So it's like effectively he's taking a pay decrease. And like again, like I told the store manager on that one too, because you know, like Home Depot likes to take this posture like, oh, we're listening to you, we're gonna fix it, we're gonna make it better. And I'm like, how the hell you gonna make it better? You still ain't done sitting down with me and like actually said, Joe, like what's going on, what's happening.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Instead, you come through with this dog and pony show. Oh, yeah, let's take pictures and we care about you. It's like, look, man, like, bro, like, we're from around here. Like, you got people who try and scheme on you all the time, who tell you a lot of nice things. Like, it's about what you do.
Yeah.
It's about what you do, and they just.
Yeah. I got slick talking friends like back home.
Yeah,
like I know when I'm being bullshitted. Like
yeah,
just
you know when
like,
you're being worked. Yeah.
Yeah, pay me my money, give us more of a say on the job, like actually qualitatively address the issues that are leading the receiving area to be such a mess, that are leading one person to get stuck, you know, on a register with a long line. Like, these are structural issues that really, you know, impact people's quality of life, contributing to, you know, like the other issues, right? It all kind of ripples out. And you're right, I don't know why so many managers, executives, and even people in the media don't get this. Because this is like, as you know, like the thing, it was like the bane of my existence last year, reporting on the crisis on the railroads, right? Because I just kept talking to railroad worker after railroad worker, and they would go for hours talking about how much worse the job has gotten, how much worse their lives have gotten doing that job over the course of these long shifts in the industry that have like reduced the crew sizes down to 2 people when they used to be like 5, at the same time that the freight rail, the trains have gone from being like a mile long to like 3 miles long. So there are more derailments. They're on call all the time because they just keep laying people off, so there are no more reserves to fill in if someone needs to take off sick.
They like have to like travel like all the time too? Like they spend most of their year traveling from job to job?
Depends on like what role you are, but like the guys who repair the track, yeah, like there were guys who were basically living in boxcars because they have to like go to these sites in the middle of nowhere to fix like a broken piece of track. The rail companies didn't want to like pay them to have travel in hotels. It was really like feudal level shit. And the engineers and the conductors, they're on call 24/7. Their workplace is moving. Anyway, point being is that it was driving me nuts watching the corporate media say like, oh, but these workers are being offered like the largest pay raise they've seen in, you know, like a generation. And I was like, if you talk to a worker for like 2 seconds, the first thing out of their mouths will be, it's not about money, right? The money, like, yeah, we need that money because everyone needs their wages going up, cost of living is going up, we do a hard job, yada, yada, yada. It's like, but there's so much more here that just no one's paying attention to, or they don't want to acknowledge it. It's driving everyone nuts. And so I think that, like you said, one other kind of real takeaway lesson for people is, you know, you don't want to shy away from, yeah, we need more pay. That's important. But also like being able to articulate kind of what having a union, i.e. having workers with a real say on the job, like why that would be so vital for improving people's quality of life, the quality of service, whatever that service may be, ultimately should benefit everyone.
No, absolutely. And I mean, like, that was why, like, for instance, like, we tried going the route of, like, an independent union, was because what we wanted it to really look like was, like when you're sitting here, we didn't want it to be that, like, people in the store had this idea that somebody from the outside was going to come in, because that's kind of the problem. Is that when you want something fixed, like, people from the outside come in. It's like, no, like, the ones that are gonna know, the ones that do know the best, the ones that like right, we could talk all day about this, or if you wanted to talk about the problems at Home Depot, I could run you through every department and tell you why it is that these issues exist between my experience and the experience of the people that work within there. But that's how you can see so clearly, and that's where you see the people that have the power to make decisions, like, they're not there to know. They're not there to understand. And where I gave, like I said, especially like a lot of the previous management team a lot more slack than what I would this current management team, was because the previous management team, the problem that you have too with the cultures like at Home Depot, cultures at Amazon, cultures just in corporate America in general, is that they're not just as it's difficult to be a principled person, it's also difficult to tell the truth. Right? Especially an expensive truth, right? Because that's how these companies look at it, is, no, that's an expensive truth. That's why they want to sit here and they want to just say, oh, we'll slap a dollar amount on it, or, oh, we'll put a bathroom in, and then like, oh, like, well, that's it, we're just going to walk away from that. And it's like, no, like, what you guys are going to have to reckon with, and I think that this is a more meta point, right? Like, you're going to have to recognize with the legacy of big business in this country and the way in which you damaged society when back in the 80s you asked for that responsibility, right? Like, that's also like another frame of reference I have. Like I always say, like the last paper I wrote in high school was like comparing the 2008 recession to the 1930s, Great Depression, and kind of looking at the similarities between, the stock market, buying stocks on margin, kind of having like just this inflated market with like no real assets behind it. The same thing, derivatives, stuff like that with the housing market, and kind of seeing how, we could have like predicted this and like we've been here before, just in a different media again. And then you go back and you look and it's, businesses, trust us, you can trust us, right? We'll be able to make the money. We'll also be the moral leaders for society. So it's like, no, you guys would sell out your own fucking mother for $1. And we're supposed to take
I've seen what you guys do with all that money and power.
And we're supposed to take advice from you now on like how to be a happy society. Like, no, dude, fuck that. And it's like, that's like the more meta point where it's like, it's not just enough to give people dollars and stuff like that. It's just like, now the only thing that I personally can see, again, from my experience and from talking to other people, the only thing that's going to make this shit better holistically for society as a whole, meaning the totality of people, is for people to be given more wiggle room to like define life for themselves. And that's going to come at the expense of the executives. That's going to come, like, what was it? I think it was Anne Marie Campbell. Man, I wish I could remember the exact numbers, but it was something like she made, it was like 7 or 8 million the one year. And you see it's like 800,000 in like the base salary, like the same check that I collect every 2 weeks, and like 1.5 million was like a bonus, and then the other 2 or 3 million was like all like stock options, stuff like that. And it's like, that's the harder thing to get people to see, is like, that's why things are the way that they are, is because they can go home, right? Like, they're talking about these raises that they're giving us stuff. They really struggle to find the money. You guys spent 15 billion in stock buybacks in 2021.
Last year alone.
Let alone like, I'm waiting to the end of this month for 2022's freaking financial report, because I'm really interested to see how this one went, because according to I know a lot of companies kind of had a little bit more of a down year from 2022 compared to 2021, but the way that Home Depot was spitballing numbers, I think by like, by the third quarter, I think they were at like 12 or 13 billion in profit. You know what I mean? And they made 16 billion the year before that. And the year before that, they made about 12. So they're already beating 2 years prior. They're on track to beat 2022. And it's like, that's kind of like what they bank on, those like people not paying attention to that and just going like, trust us, like we know, like we can't do it. And it's like, look, man, I'm gonna say like I'm not a CPA, I'm not a certified financial advisor, but I'm gonna say like this, like, y'all had 15 billion to pump into your stocks, mind you. To begin, what is it, like, I think it was like November of 2020 or something like that. It was about $400 a share for a stock. By the time you got to like June of 2021, it was back down to like $300. It's like, you put all that, where to go? Like, where to go? Because I can tell you, like, for the people that I work with, right, a simple calculation, we made 30.1 million in profit in 2021. You just take the 3.4 million that they made in excess, right? So they wanted 26.7 million. You just take that 3.4 that they made over, and you bump that, and let's say you do half and half, right? So let's say you do half to associates in their pay, and then half to like actually hiring people and like alleviating the stuff. It was a $6,000 yearly increase in their pay and hiring about 50 more full-time people, right? And instead they're talking about like this $2 raise. Let's just say everybody in the store gets it, right? It's about $4,000 per person, which breaks out to like 1 point something or 2 something, like 2 million, right? Like, that's all you can take. That's not even the excess that you made in your profit. Like, we're talking about out of $30 million in profit. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you take the percentages of that, right? And these are conversations that we have with people. When you take the percentage, right? When you take the 500,000 that we made in 2021 and like what they call success sharing, which is like the bonuses, that broke down to, I think it was like maybe like 1% or maybe less than 1% of like the store. No. Mentira. It was like it was around 4% of what the store's profits were that year. When you take the dividends that shareholders made and you divide it by the profit, which was about 40%, right? Shareholders got about 12 million of the profit that we made in that store. And the associates who were there every day during the pandemic got 500,000 that year. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's like when you look at it like that, and that's what we were trying to tell people, is it's like this, like, you're sitting here, right? And you're like, no, I want $1. No, I want $1.35. And I'm like, yo, my boy, like, that's chump change. Like, you deserve so much more than that. And it would be so interesting to talk to them and be like there was one lady I went back and forth with. I'm like, oh, like, why don't we pay people for the machines? Oh, well, people should just look to do that if they want career opportunities at Home Depot. And I'm like, I remember one time talking with a manager. We're standing by the grout. And I'm like, Ev, you see this grout, right? You sell this stuff, right? You can't just, if a customer comes up and says, yeah, I want this for free, you're not going to do it, right? It's not sustainable. Because Home Depot's in the business. It's on home improvement goods. So you got to sell your shit to make your money, pay your bills, right? It's like, I, as a worker, I don't sell grout. I sell my ability to speak Spanish. I sell my ability to drive the machines. I sell my ability to work multiple departments.
So your body, your time, yeah.
So how is that conducive to me paying? Like, why would that work? Not work for you guys, but somehow it's supposed to work for me.
Yeah, so I can give all of myself for free or like do all this other extra shit for very little compensation. That's a great way to put it. It's like, yeah, you guys don't just give away the stuff in the store,
You don't just give shit away. And then meanwhile, like, you have like these people, like there was one dude, oh my God, this shit was so funny. This guy, yo, shouts out to Pepe. Pepe hates me. I hope
Shout out.
I hope he sees this, right? Because he's another one, right? We're sitting there, we're talking about paying people for translating. And he's like, oh, well, I don't get paid to translate. And it's like, my boy, you make like a 6-figure salary. You make like...
You do get paid to translate.
You make like 3 times what I make. If I made 3 times as much as I make right now, I probably wouldn't be saying shit to Home Depot either about, you know, oh, yeah, I need to get paid for translating. Yeah. But at the time when you're getting paid like $16, $17 an hour and 30-40% of your customer base that goes through that store is solely Spanish speaking, I guess just when it comes to workers, we forget about the concepts of supply and demand and, you know, value within skill. It's like, and that's the thing is, it's because people just ultimately, like, it feels like they just got conditioned to, like, forget that, right? And I think that's like some of the stuff that I saw that was highlighted, that's like the legacy of, like, that big business push from, like, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? You get labor that gets a little bit too strong, things kind of get wonky. And, of course, that pendulum swings all the way back in the other way, and that's where you find yourself is, so now it's like, you're like in this like broken society, right? And again, like I see this with my coworkers in the store where it's like the store's making record profits, right? The company's making record profits. You know, technically salaries are going up, right? What's the corporate media saying? Oh, well, your wages are going up. But simultaneously, like everybody is fucking miserable, like miserable. And it's like, that shit sucks. You walk into work and these are good people, right? Like these are really good people who have taught me things, who are mothers or fathers or brothers or sisters, like who deserve to be happier in life, and they're miserable. And you're like, what are they, 90% of the time when they're complaining and they're like in that misery bag, what are they complaining about? Oh, can you believe this thing at work? Can you believe that? I'm just like, yo, we need to start spending less time at work. You know, when I was the happiest, when
I wasn't in this fucking place.
When I was working like 20, 30 hours a week, when I was still in school, I was working on my degree, I'm moving towards something, trying to do a little bit of fitness stuff, do a little bit of music stuff, right? And you're doing the things you like, that's when you're happy.
Yeah.
You know, when I became the most miserable, when I got promoted and started spending 60, 70 hours a week, and like the music went from my head, I didn't touch the guitar for a while, and you're like, oh. And then it's like, there's like a party where you're like, dude, like, is this shit like calculated?
Yeah, it's hard not to feel like it is sometimes too, right? You know, and what it makes me think, and I know I gotta wrap this up because I could talk to you for hours.
Forever. I know, I'm pretty bad at it too.
No, man, it's an honor to be sitting here and chatting with you and to be in this struggle with you, right? And I know that we're gonna have many more conversations until we're old asses, reflecting on the world that we and everyone else helped create. But like until then, you know, it reminds me about what we were talking about in the beginning, right? Of just that mental shift, right? Of thinking that, well, you know, if this job is shit, this store is shit, this situation is shit, like my best option is to think as, you know, just about myself and be like, I'm out. Like I'll find something else elsewhere. And I think that, you know, it's ultimately up to every person to make that decision for themselves. I've reported on horrific situations like Evan Seyfried, right, who was being bullied by his managers at a Ohio Kroger to the point that he had a, you know, transient episodic break and killed himself. Like, I'm not saying that, like, never quit. Obviously, there are reasons, there are situations that you have to get yourself out of. So I just wanted to make that point quick. But like for the rest of us, right, I do think there's something very hopeful in that shift that I'm seeing in a lot of people. where we're thinking more in terms of social solidarity, right? Or more in terms of like, well, like we've got to stand up for something, otherwise nothing's going to get better, right? And I think about Mathieu Bolredat, the train operator in France. He's also the kind of union local leader for the CGT out of Versailles. I love this guy, but he's right now striking in Paris, along with his fellow countrymen, millions of them, against President Emmanuel Macron's like bullshit proposals to like totally neoliberalize the pension system, raise the retirement age, and the French are pissed, right? So the workers are taken to the streets and saying like, we don't want this, like we love our pension system. And one of the reasons that he said so is he's like, there's more to life than work. Like people in the United States may see this and be like, oh, I don't get to retire at 62, 64, so why should the French? And it's like, because what we have seen from studies is that especially for low wage workers, workers who work in physically demanding jobs, you're basically dead in your mid 60s. Like on average, like that's your life expectancy is a lot lower. So what you are asking people to do is work until you die. And we are saying life is more valuable than that. And what really struck me about what Mathieu said about why French workers are fighting for that pension system resonates with what you talked about earlier in this conversation. You mentioned John Deere. It's what John Deere workers told me during their strike, Kellogg's workers during their strike, which is like, we are standing up for all workers. Because what Mathieu Bolredat told me is he's like, I'm not just fighting to keep my pension. I'm fighting because this pension system is the legacy of our grandfathers who fought to install it after the Nazi occupation. So who the fuck are we to not carry that torch on?
Exactly.
And who the fuck am I to not fight to keep that legacy alive for my daughter, right? And then I hear that when Kellogg's workers, you know, when they were on strike a year and a half ago, said, the older workers, union workers, like, we're not really asking for anything. We just see in this contract that they're trying to set it up so that everyone who walks in the door after us is going to get shittier pay, shittier benefits. It's going to be easier to like capture them in this like lower wage position that they can't advance in, and we are fighting for them. And so like I think that I'm seeing the sprouts of this sense that if we don't do something, nothing's going to get better. But also it's like we're fighting for more than ourselves. And I think that that's the context I wanted to kind of have us end this conversation in. Because like you said, there are always going to be haters who say, oh, you guys tried to unionize a Home Depot, it didn't work, you know, fuck you, right? You know, end of story. But as we're clearly talking about here, it's like, no, like first off, the union effort, while it may have been unsuccessful, had tangible benefits for you, your coworkers, and also like we can't even estimate like the kinds of decisions that are being made at other businesses because they're terrified of something like this happening at their company, right? So like there are effects that we should take stock of, but also like there's like a movement of movements happening here, right? We're in Philadelphia that, much like Baltimore, is seeing these sprouts of worker mobilization that I think are really hopeful. Not just you guys at your Home Depot store trying to unionize, but shout out to Local 80, who are really kind of doing something interesting and important here, where it's almost like sectoral organizing to like organize throughout the like coffee supply chain, from the roasteries to the distributors to the coffee shops, and have had some big victories in the city. The Philadelphia Museum of Art workers went on a valiant 19-day strike and won huge concessions in their contract fight, just like workers in Baltimore at the Baltimore Museum of Art unionized last year. Workers at the Walters Museum of Art are fighting to unionize, right? Johns Hopkins grad students just won their union election. So stuff is happening, right? And right now, as we speak, research assistants and teachers assistants at Temple University are on strike. We need to support them. And so I think about the campaign you were involved in that context. right? Like it's, as we said, it's one battle in a larger war. And I guess I wanted to sort of round out by asking you to kind of reflect a bit on that, like how you see this struggle where you've been at your store connected to like what's going on around the city and beyond.
I mean, that's right. It's a solidarity movement. It's a movement that is predicated on connection. And I guess like the frame of reference that I personally use, I guess I could say like two things, right? So the first one I'll say is like, to the point that you were making earlier too, right? That generational change. So I think about like my parents. My parents grew up in extreme poverty. My mom grew up in North Philly, you know, very, very poor, had 10 brothers and sisters. My dad grew up poor in Puerto Rico, which is like, that's like a different type of poor, right? And so I think about the struggles that they went through all the time, right? And basically, like how they did what they told me to do and how it worked for them. And it made sense at that time because that was just the time in which they were in. And unfortunately, because of the economic circumstances that they grew up in, they were not afforded the opportunity to consider what it is that they wanted out of life. But at the same time, like out of respect for their struggle, now I have to consider that. I can't go back, you know, on that socioeconomic ladder because then that's disrespectful to my parents. But the problem is that we're in an environment right now where though I may try as I may, you know, like, look, I don't miss work. I show up every day. I gave 110%. Like, I killed myself, and there are millions of people in this country who do the same exact thing and get absolutely nothing for it. And so then it's up to us to make sure that our parents' struggle was worth it. Because in the end, it was our parents who got exploited, our parents and our grandparents who got exploited through this system. And so now when I look, right, you see all the kid stuff, right? I got a little 2-year-old. Like, what do I want him to grow up in? You know, I wanna figure out how I can live the life that I wanna live so that he can do it even more so, right? Maybe he can be even more impactful in his lifetime and do it, or maybe not. Maybe like as long as he has the freedom to kind of carve out that path the way that he sees fit. Like life is a very personal journey, but we're living in a society that does not allow that for people. And so I think off of that context, like that's something that I think is big because you owe it to those who came before you, even if they don't recognize it, right? Even if they have the mentality of like, oh, well, why? Trust me, some of the people that I still think about, we're like over here like, oh, who do you think you are? You can't, but it's not about that, right? It's about the principle of it. It's about the standard that you're trying to live to, you know? And then you think about those who come after you, right? And like you were saying, the gentleman over in France, it's, you know, it's about making sure that something stays in place so that, you know, look, kind of being selfishly selfless too, so that when you put your head on the pillow for the last time, you're like, all right, you know, they're gonna have their own problems, but there's at least a baseline that we left for them to be able to work through.
Well, and it translates to so many things. Like the reason I brought it up was thinking about, it's like, well, I'm not gonna leave all this trouble at my job and at my store just for some other poor sucker who's gonna walk in the door. Like there's a sense that like that's not the socially responsible or conscientious thing to do, you know, and so more people are saying like, I'm going to make life better here because that's something that I can do, it's something I can pass on, or I'm just at least not willing to just pass the buck onto someone I don't know. Like I have a little more consideration for how what I do now impacts people who are not me. In the same way that, like you said, when we lay our heads on the pillow for the last time, we are all at this moment like called to action to do whatever the fuck we can to leave the world at least a little less worse off than it was when we inherited it. And with climate change, inequality, war, like we've got a lot of work to do. And so just even having that sense of seeing ourselves in those generational terms, seeing the struggle as the struggle of a lifetime, and seeing it as a struggle that we may never ever get to see the end of, right? But that we're all a part of. Like, that's why I brought it up.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I would tether that, right? Like, so, and that's like the fun thing about it, right? Because you also have to try your best to find like the fun moments in these things, and where I kind of find that cross, right? And this is like this will be the last point I make, like on just like where like my head is at and where I would encourage other people to have their head at. And I'm gonna take from two different things. I'm gonna take from some stuff I love. So from the Eagles and just that team this year and some of the stuff I've heard in their interviews, but also from the things that I like in terms of like, hey, like I got my Marvel socks on. I got, if you go in my room, I have like 20,000 Star Wars shirts and jackets and stuff. Like I love all of that stuff, right? And so I'll start off with the Eagles point, which is the reason why they talk about how they played so hard was because they played for each other, right? The thing that made me go so hard was like when, like, right, I'd be feeling really down, and then like one of my coworkers would come up and they would be like, oh, like I saw the interview you did, like that was awesome, like you said exactly what we were thinking, right? And that will kind of be the shot in the arm that you need when you're feeling really down, when it's really difficult, you know. And right, like I think about like growing up in church. Not that I was particularly religious, but like a lot of those lessons stayed with me, and something that they would always talk about is one of the most honorable things you can do in your life is to fight for your fellow human, right? And I mean, clearly that's something like, you know, which yourself does with the Real News Network, with the many endeavors that you take on, is to fight for the person next to you, because that is something that's really fulfilling. But what I would kind of expand it with is like, look, I'm a nerd, I'm a dork, I love Star Wars, I love Marvel, I love like all those things, superhero, but I love like getting into the philosophy behind it. And one of the things that really motivated me, and actually funny enough, it was like a huge inspiration. I also don't like talking about this stuff sometimes just because of how much like the right co-ops it, but like the Matrix, like I love the Matrix and the path of the one in the story that they go on. And it's like, look, like it's cheesy, but like this is your opportunity as a person to kind of live that same, right? Like ain't nobody gonna, Morpheus ain't gonna call you on the phone while you at work, like, bro, you need to get out of there, you know, and have like this crazy adventure, like, right, like those are movies, those are fantasies, but we can still take the core concepts behind them and apply them in our lives, and right, that's then how you become, you know, a superhero within your own region, right? And that's, I feel like that's also the core behind like those who we admire, like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, or those people who went out and, you know, they didn't have like super strength or anything like that, but they had this ability to galvanize and bring this togetherness with people and to act. And that's the important thing to remember, is for those who came before you and those who will come after you, it is incumbent on you to try and be the best superhero you can be, and to go out there and to take on that fight, regardless of if you stay or not. Like, look, I'm actively working on leaving. Do you think I'm going to stop this fight? No. No, because again, if you really want to see things be different, bro, it's cheesy. We've heard it our whole life, but it's true. You got to be the change you want to see. You got to be the change you want to see. And I think we're getting to a point now where the fear of things staying the same is overcoming the fear of things changing. And once that happens, find ourselves in a dangerous situation. But that's what I want to tell everybody out there. It's time to go be Batman. Attention Home Depot associates, just a reminder that in September you can again file for a union election. Fun fact, in the last 3 years, this store has made $87.4 million in profit, giving $40.5 to shareholders and only $1 million to associates. Remember this when they say that they care about you. In September, you can file again.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.